I think we'll start. Awesome. So let me do this. There we go. So thank you so much, Professor, for joining us. Really appreciate it. We're here to discuss about the future of AI and technology, and I'll tell you kind of like how I kind of like reached out to you. So I think we're friends on LinkedIn for some time, and I just saw tons of LinkedIn posts about you from students. And also I saw that you like attended super cool like meetups and stuff, and you're writing a lot about AI and technology. And then kind of like when I read more about you and your bio, it was like so it was just it made perfect sense that like we want to host you for a discussion about the future of AI and technology. So without further ado, I'll just let you present yourself, and then we'll kind of like discuss more about the topic itself.
Sure, Almog, thank you for having me. I'm grateful to you and everybody who has joined us this afternoon and the innovation squad at Haas, right? So I've been at Haas for I want to say about 4.5 years, and I spent about 5 years before that being a visiting scholar at the Berkeley Roundtable on the International Economy, which is attached to Haas or between Haas and Citrus. And I teach courses, as you already pointed out, Almog, in strategy, strategic leadership, strategic foresight, and futures, but then also tech courses like management of emerging tech, future of tech, and various courses around artificial intelligence, whether that is AI and ethics or AI and business transformation, which is a new course I'll be offering in the EMBA program this fall. And so that's essentially my profile at Haas. Before that, I had about 10 years of teaching at a different business school and with campuses around the world. So one of my specialties is that I take a very global look at things. I am an immigrant, as it were, to the United States, a naturalized citizen. And so as such, I know what it's like to come to the United States as a foreign student and making a career here in this country. My career has been global, thoroughly global, with global tech companies, starting with Vodafone and Qualcomm, Boeing, one tech startup, and then the tech and innovation practice at Monitor Group, which is now part of Deloitte. So I'm a practitioner. I'm a professional faculty member, or as they say, professor of practice, professor of industry. Have a PhD, but really enjoy teaching and coaching and advising. I'm also the CEO of a small boutique advisory think tank called Cambrian Futures. You can find us under Cambrian.ai, Cambrian as in the geological era. And before you tell me it's all about dinosaurs, it is, of course, not. It is about the explosion of life that happened in the Cambrian era, and we believe that with emerging and cognitive tech now coming up strong, that there is an explosion of opportunity for us to shape if we mitigate the risks, right? And so Cambrian Futures does the thinking and the advising and the strategizing, the researching, and then we have a sister organization called Cambrian Labs. And Cambrian Labs then develops solution concept design. So we're not product developers. Some of us have done product development, but that's not what we do. We help people think through what a solution would look like, what you need to do to put it in place, what you need to do to fund it, what the IP is, and then if the client doesn't want to run with it themselves, we patent the IP and run with it ourselves. So that's who I am in a nutshell. So I'm all about the frontier and love taking others with me to the frontier, such as our beloved students, right? So that's why we're here.
Really appreciate it. And I want to kind of like start, I think it's like December 2022 where ChatGPT kind of like came to the world and made a lot of kind of like noise. I'm kind of like curious to hear your thoughts about how do you see the overall impact of generative AI since like the like the release of ChatGPT on the tech industry and kind of like the society in the whole, because now like generative AI is everywhere, but also like it feels like not a lot of companies are making a very kind of like good use of it. So it's like, how do you see kind of like the last year in terms of like what happened in that landscape?
Yeah. Look, we have to realize that ChatGPT and transformers in general are at least the publicly released versions, right, are only about 2 or 3 years old. And research on these have been going on for a while, right? In fact, Google was first. It wasn't OpenAI first with transformers, but OpenAI picked it up and then started putting the stuff out there hard and fast about 2.5 years ago. That is a very, very small amount of time when you compare it to the amount of time that we've had to build the internet, right? And going back to sort of the early and mid 1990s. And why that's relevant is that we need to realize that these 2 years, this hype, this explosion of attention, of investment, of energy around ChatGPT and transformers is really based on some 25, 30 years of generating data on top of digital infrastructure, right? So it's a very, very recent thing. And look, I mean, with regard to transformers, um, I think we can liken it to a moody teenager, as it were, right? So a teenager that's really very smart, and we're impressed by what it can do, and it also does some pretty stupid stuff, right? And that's the right of a teenager, because they're supposed to experiment and play and do things that we wouldn't necessarily think are very good or smart. But they prompt us to think about the world differently. That's what teenagers do to us as well, right? And they rebel. And so we are in that rebellious and chaotic frenzy stage of teenagerdom or teenagerhood, as it were, right? Which is a bit of progress, needless to say. Previously, I think we sort of had the likening of AI being sort of at the stage of a 7 or 8 year old, right? But no more than that. Now it's seeming like it can start to make sense of context and of causality and of logic out there, right? Because it studies language, and language is just that, right? It is a way for us to tell narratives, convey logic, and causality. And so, as such, we have grown up a little bit now with AI, but make no mistake about it, this thing has a long way to go before it can grow up. So right now we're at that hype stage of that really smart teenager. Look how beautiful it is, right? But anybody or any one of you who studied the hype cycle, the Gardner hype cycle, of course, the students of mine in the management on emerging tech course will get very familiar with the hype cycle. We're on our way up the hype cycle, the slope of inflated expectations, and then there is a peak, and then we'll come back the other side, right? Now, maybe not all the way into a trough of disillusionment, just because there's so much money being pumped in that we will probably figure out what exactly the highest value use cases are. But that's really what it is about, right? When something's overhyped, the clear-minded and clear-eyed view of the entrepreneur, the strategist, the venture capitalist needs to be focused on where are the discrete, narrow, well-defined use cases for these things that actually generate ROI, right? And there are some that generate a lot of ROI, and then there are some that generate no ROI. And I think right now a lot of people in the market are overhyping the humongous ROI statements, and I think are a bit clouding our view to the fact that we still have a lot of figuring out to do, right? This is pervasive throughout many functional areas in corporations. When you look at some of the McKinsey charts, for instance, right, it's these eye charts, right? It is, of course, flabbergasting, right, that this thing is weaving its way through our lives now. But that doesn't mean every one of those are actually profitable, and that's where we need to focus.
So you've mentioned two things, that it has a long way to go and we have a lot of things to figure out. I'm kind of like curious to hear your thoughts about that. Like, how do you see the future? And what do you think are kind of like the core topics that we should, like figure out?
Hello.
Yeah. So I think when it comes
Hello.
to
There we go.
yeah, that's all right. That happens. So within transformers, And of course, for now, specifically the text-based ones, right? I think what we have to figure out first and foremost is when is hallucination a good thing and when is it a bad thing, right? If you are intent on using transformers for fact-based research, empirical research, where you rely on it bringing back the ground truth on whatever your question is, then you have to be very careful because we've seen what happens when you expect that and a transformer starts hallucinating and making things up. Okay. And yet, the flip side of that is that that what happened there with Google's applications is in fact can in fact be very valuable if the target function or the question you ask it, the prompt is, show me some show me some interesting notions around the concept of a pope, right? And then it comes up with a black pope or with, I mean, you get what I'm trying to say. It comes up with all kinds of things that historically have not yet taken place and are not true, but that are creative stimulus. Wouldn't it be great to have a black pope? Wouldn't it be great to have a female president, right? Or whatever it is. And so provoking us that way is actually quite valuable, especially if your role is one that has to do with creativity and ideation and things like that, right? But that's a very different functionality than the true empirical ground truth one. And we're very sort of confused often in how we create models and how we market models and how we buy models, where we want one but not the other, and then we buy the wrong thing and we get the wrong results. So I think that's definitely one thing where we have to just become a lot more professional, a lot more discerning, a lot more disciplined. And that also entails, getting better with our governance, right? That Google offering should not have seen the light of day when it did. Senior management, right, should have been in there and should have approved that, reviewed it and approved it, and apparently didn't. I can't explain it any other way, right? So see, right now our excitement is so great at this thing that we're willing to cut corners. We're willing to sort of, again, throw it at the wall and see if it sticks. And I think that is something we need to get a lot better at, because the cognitive era, the era of AI, means that we have to be a bit more deliberate about what we put out, when, and how. This is not your average piece of enterprise software, right? Where it's not like that's trivial if it goes wrong, but it's not going to objectify hundreds of millions of people all at once, and transformers will. And so that's definitely one on transformers. There's obviously many more things I could say about AI in general.
So as you said, like there is so much work to do to get to, like the optimal point. And we have a lot of students here kind of like probably sitting and kind of like they're curious about how they can, become part of this era in terms of like actually, either starting their own startups or, getting a job within this field. So I'm kind of like curious to hear your thoughts about like what, what should they learn or what should they do to become, like part of this revolution.
Yeah. Look, I mean, really just, I'll start with the basics. You can learn a lot by subscribing to mailing lists and by being part of meetups and just soaking everything up that's going on around you, whether it's things like what we're doing just now, or whether it's heading down to Silicon Valley to going events. You don't always have to be formal, right, to acquire a certain amount of knowledge if you're just passionate enough, driven enough, and if you're a good networker, right? And venture capitalists will tell you that too, right? There are many venture capitalists that are getting into AI or before that into clean tech, right, or into blockchain, who had no formal training in any of this. They just studied hard and fast, talked to a whole bunch of people, and then they get smart on a space, right? So what I'm trying to do with that is to lower the hurdle for you to exercise your passions, okay? And a lot can be done without a formal degree, formal coursework, paying any money anywhere, right? But then, of course, I would tell you that it would be even more valuable if every Haas major took a data science course or took an AI course. And of course, I teach various AI courses. Mine are usually at sort of at a strategy level, strategy, policy, organizational transformation, governance frameworks, and things like that. And I do have some courses that explain the tech as well, but we have people who are more technically versed than even I am, right? I'm thinking about Tom Lee or uh, name it maybe sort of two or three other professors, who are technically very well versed, and they offer AI courses, data science courses. Everybody should try to take at least one of these to get familiar with how these things work, how they're designed, what the target functions are, how do you tweak them, how do you shape them, how do you govern them, how do you get to ROI, right? What is the business case for each one of these applications? And look, I mean, it doesn't matter what grade you get in it, right? Even if you have to take a hit because you might think of yourself as, we always talk about poets and quants, right? But maybe you're not a quant, right? And maybe you're a little afraid of the math or the statistics or whatever it may be. That's okay. Even if you get a mediocre grade, it doesn't really matter as long as you understand the concepts, you can handle the language, and you can speak with others, right, who maybe go deeper than you do, but with their help, you can also go to depth, right? So speaking the language is really so terribly important, and grades don't matter. So I would encourage you, take courses, whether it's at Haas or in our new division for compute data and society, or whether it's on Coursera or whatever, but get smart, right? So that's one side. The other side, though, is Amok, and then I'll be quiet again. Um, is remember what some of the computer scientists tell us. They say, look, we understand code, right? And especially if you come from a fantastic computer science program like Berkeley, which is one of the top ones in the world. And right behind Google, we are the number two in terms of number of AI PhDs and faculty, right, working there. So they understand code, but some of them say what we don't understand is people. And think about that, right? So you get a whole bunch of people in computer science who are changing the world with their code, as they should. And I'm a bit of a geek, so I'm all for geeks. And at the same time, as we need to understand the technology, they need to understand people. And so make sure that you are a wanderer between worlds, a bridge, right? That you never forget about people. And it sounds trivial, right? Because we are people and we're thinking of ourselves as reasonably social animals. We must be good at people, but many of us aren't. And there's room for improvement, right? I mean, just recall the last time you had a customer service call and you're like, what are they smoking, right? I mean, I don't understand what they're saying. They don't get me. And it's a frustrating experience, right? Or you go see a doctor and they have like zero bedside manner. They don't have any time. They're rushed and they treat you like like you're, I don't know what, right? A lower life form. And then you wonder, why in the world did you go into medicine, right? And that just shows you that even people who are in these people professions are not always very good at that. So pair the data, the AI, right, with and the economics of it all, right, with the human philosophy, psychology, sociology, anthropology, ethics, right? Ethics and economics are tied by each other's hips in the cognitive era. You got to understand both and master both. So get better at people and get better at AI.
I absolutely love that, and it kind of like reminds me of what Steve Jobs used to say about like the intersection between liberal arts and technology. And I'm kind of like curious to hear your thoughts about how universities should adapt their own program and own like the whole concept um, to better prepare students for the AI era. You've mentioned a lot of courses and stuff, but like thinking the high level, how do you think like if you would have to like create a university from scratch? Like how would you do that in terms of like preparing students for what what comes?
Yeah, so I would probably convert I would probably convert the pure knowledge take in to be digested by and to be served up in an individually customized way by different AI applications, right? I would tailor the pure content to who my students are, or my clients for that matter, and make sure that it is the intake works a lot better, more quicker, and is much more enjoyable, right? I mean, when you read through some textbooks or through some cases or academic articles, right, your eyes start to glaze over, and and clearly they weren't written necessarily with you as an individual in mind. They were written for a mass audience, right? So customizing and making cognitively palatable all that content would be what I would use artificial intelligence for. And then I would use professors. I mean, leaving the research side aside for a moment and just focusing on teaching, right? I would use professors really more in line with the concept of a coach, where yes, you might give a talk, you might give a lecture, but assuming that AI will do a lot of the basic stuff, right? Then it's about really about inspiration, about ideation, about design, about strategizing, about synthesizing, and co-creating. So again, the human, the professor 2.0, as it were, really as somebody who uses and leverages the AI to do effectively and efficiently what the prof can't do in a classroom of 70 people, right? I can't get to you individually when you're sitting in the back row somewhere in a classroom. I mean, we might do a little bit of Q&A, but unless I have you one-on-one somewhere, I don't really know how to get to you, right? But the AI can. But what I can do then is, based on that, and you having digested that content, I can go in and I can be inspirational. I can sort of, parse my time up to be in small groups, to be in individual settings, with that time savings that the AI enables for me, right? That's one. And then I would probably change the business model a bit as well, right? I would make it more modular. I would make it more flexible. I might offer some things that will use artificial intelligence to be a lifelong, let's say, Berkeley-Haas companion for you, right? Wouldn't that be fantastic? You leave Haas whenever you graduate, right, this year or next year, and you leave Haas and you get like a little Berkeley-Haas bot, right? That is on your phone or wherever, and serves up sort of Haas branded, Haas curated content and coaching. And so, that sounds very avant-garde. I will tell you that different business schools have thought about this, but it's a very hard switch to make.
I love that. And I see that we have a lot of questions in the comments. So I do want to kind of like leave 15 minutes for questions. So we have a lot of questions here. That's great. So those who wrote the questions, feel free to open the mic and ask. I think that would work better. Who wants to start? I see 2 questions from Naresh here, if you want to go.
Oh, yeah, sure. First of all, thank you, should I say Dr. Groth or Olaf? But thank you very much for all your insights. That's great. I had 2 questions. The first one was, in the chat. We have seen some of the companies actually take a leadership role in defining the future of AI. But I was just wondering, how can the general public influence the way AI is used in, especially in healthcare or criminal justice, where there will be a lot of repercussions in terms of how this is, in the societal impact. So I was just wondering, what are your thoughts in terms of that, and how do we make sure that AI systems reflect the values and needs of everyone, but not just a very specific few who really has this access to the technology?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and you're absolutely right. Currently, we're seeing the we're really seeing a quasi oligopoly on the part of the large platforms, right? Whether it's the 7 American or the whatever 5, 6, 7 Chinese ones, they're really the key innovators on artificial intelligence around the world, and that's more largely driven by the fact that an AI PhD fresh out of Berkeley or Stanford costs between $500,000 and $1 million a year. And GPU arrays are very expensive as well, and you need a lot of them to process all that data to train all these huge parameter models. And so there aren't that many institutions in the world that can pay for that. And so that's the self-perpetuating cycle, and we have an interest, I think, as you rightly frame it, in the public interest to counterbalance that a bit. And that doesn't mean the Googles, Facebooks, and Amazons of this world should be disempowered. It just means it would be good to have a counterbalance there. And that's, of course, where open source AI comes in. And we're now seeing this spring up, whether it's out of universities or whether it's through Meta's Llama model, which is sort of open, or whether it's through enterprise models that are custom designed by people now to fit certain types of industries and segments. We will be seeing, and we are seeing now, the rise of a more open, more diffuse, more democratized paradigm, and I think we should empower it, recognizing, however, that frankly it's a lot easier to regulate 24 large global platforms than it is to regulate 50 million small companies that all are innovating on transformers or other forms of AI somewhere in garages. You don't even know where they are, much less who they are. And so there will be that. What can the general public do? That's a difficult one. I will tell you that when we study national AI strategies, one thing that always comes up is that people around the world are not and don't feel empowered to understand what's going on and to be able to influence it. And part of the problem is that even politicians don't know what to do with this thing, right? I mean, when you're looking at Washington, there are, of course, people there at the White House OSTP, in various think tanks that understand AI, but the broad public policy elite does not, and they're just not trained that way, and that hasn't been their focus. And so when even the political elite doesn't really know, how will they ensure that the public is well educated? And I think there's a role for us as responsible Haas leaders, right? As we say, going beyond self, right? To not just use these models and apply them to do well and hopefully also good, but to also bring other people along, right? That's the very concept of a leader, is to point the way, motivate, inspire, and say, hey, come with me, right? And here's how you can get smarter on something. And so we need public education programs almost anytime we design a strategy for somebody who is in a public sphere. We've worked with, the Prime Minister's office in UAE. We've worked with the Germans. We've done some advising in Singapore. We always say public education is so important, right? So that people understand, they don't block it, they don't vote out of fear, right? They know where the opportunity is and the risk, and they can help having a voice, right? And yeah, so that definitely needs to happen, and you can help them shape that voice.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for that. And I think when you're saying, one thing that came to my mind was, I'm actually from India. I'm an immigrant from India, and as you know, Indian government actually taken some steps to regulate AI, and they do have a national draft for the national strategy on AI from the ministry, and they're putting a lot of requirements in terms of releasing any AI applications. It needs to go through a certain approval process before it reaches the general public. Yeah, thank you for insights. Hey, Almog, should I go with my second question, or should I give the opportunity for this?
So we'll give opportunity to others, and then we can go back to your question, because we do have a lot of questions here, which is, again, it's great. So we have one question. Yeah.
Almog, I'm sorry. Let me just respond real quick, right? So I'm so glad now actually to see this India strategy coming up, because we have studied India as part of a study on 14 national AI strategies, and India did not come out favorably. And that's because India is, of course, very digital. but not very cognitive, meaning there aren't that many people who really natively design AI models. That will change with a lot of the investment in compute power and chip factories, et cetera, and with the help of this strategy. India has a lot of data, but it needs to pair that now with competency in model design and model scaling. And so I'm very, very glad to hear that, because if you don't have expertise in that, it essentially means you'll have Americans and Chinese designing for India. And with AI being a cognitive technology, it doesn't work like any other technology, right? You have to be locally appropriate. You should have Indians designing for India, right? Because Indians know India. And so I'm a big fan of that.
Thank you.
We have a question from Ameya in terms of like the AI hype cycle. Feel free to go to open your mic.
Yep. Thank you, Professor, for coming and helping us understand the landscape a little bit better. My question goes back to the first thing you mentioned, that all technologies happen in hype cycles, and we are at the start or probably in the mid of an AI hype cycle. But how do we tell like the substance from the hype, and then how do we tell what is hype and what is not? And then how long will this last? When will this last? And should we pivot our careers to basically ride on this hype cycle? How do we think about all of those things?
So I would view artificial intelligence as an incredibly important power tool. And so you should definitely learn it, just like I mean, you may be too young to have even had the choice, right, to learn how to deal with computers and mobile phones and all the apps that we use today for productivity. But it's just like that. It is, of course, an immensely important tool and a new piece of our infrastructure, not just in business and the economy, but also in politics and society at large. So you should definitely definitely become more proficient. Does that mean you're pivoting your career into AI? Well, I don't know that you need to necessarily do that, but I think pivoting your career into jobs that depend on AI, that will use AI, is a very smart future ready move. I won't say future proof, because there is no such thing as future proofing, but future readiness is very important. And so you could be helping an investment bank or a consumer goods company get smart on AI, run AI experiments, craft an AI strategy, design use cases and products. You don't have to necessarily be in a tech company to do that, right? And so I think that would be my recommendation. I would definitely pivot in the sense that you need to be ready, and you should definitely make that a big part of your learning. But it doesn't mean you have to work at a tech giant or a tech startup.
We'll take the next question from Cameron. Feel free to go ahead.
Thank you. My question is, do you see any up-and-coming architectures, use cases, or solutions in AI that haven't quite gained traction or widespread knowledge yet? Maybe I'm seeing this kind of like if we were talking about transformers or diffusion 6 or 7 years ago, before it was like very mainstream, very public, and very refined. I could add a little bit of context. I used to work in AI over at Amazon Alexa AI years ago. What we thought we were doing was so cutting edge. We were using tokenization to understand what somebody was asking us, and we thought it was so cool. But it is just so far behind what like ChatGPT can do nowadays.
Yeah. So I think you're right to say that we shouldn't be blinded by where we are right now, right? There are other horizons out there, and you're asking about those that maybe are underemphasized. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Let me maybe do it in 2 steps, right? So the first one is what is happening right now that I think is underhyped, right, as it were, and that is a couple of different spaces. Of course, we mentioned AI in healthcare, right? So there is actually a lot of good traction in AI and mental health. So things like Replica or WooBot, for instance. The founder of WooBot is a very bright Stanford PhD, I think, Irish woman, who's done some great things with WooBot. MindSpring is the other one that has done really well. And so I think AI and mental health, whether it's therapy or whether it's monitoring for depression or neural diseases, etc., which you can do by way of just observing how people are typing and swiping and speaking, right? There's tremendous potential there. We have to get beyond the HIPAA hurdles, but that can be done, and people have proven that it's possible. The next space is sort of smart cities and intelligent infrastructure. And there I will give you a company, and I will preface it by being very transparent that I'm on the board of advisors, and so as such I'm not entirely unbiased, right? But there's a company called Hayden AI, so Hayden HAYDEN.ai. In fact, we'll have the CEO of Hayden AI come into our course in a couple of weeks into our ethics and AI course. They make a computer vision AI for public transportation, enabling smoother, better public transportation, more accessible, cheaper, etc., and less energy consuming. And so I think that whole area of smarter traffic transportation city life is really promising. And then there is the area of smart manufacturing, right? So it's never sort of viewed or positioned as like sexy, right? Because we're also consumer focused. But I think it's really cool when you see some of the things that are happening there that are game changing, right? So there's this small company in Germany, and Germany is big on manufacturing, right? And Germany has brilliant computer scientists and AI scientists, but Germany is not known for big market leading AI companies just yet, right? But they have incredibly cool talent, and there's this company called Daedalus, and it's DAEDALUS, Daedalus. And they develop AI for custom manufacturing for very small manufacturers that have to deal with very particular small amounts of very high value, very particular parts. And those parts are changing on a frequent basis. And then there is a pain point in the market that the manufacturer can't get enough supply from these small manufacturers because they can't retool quickly enough. And so now this company is building AI powered custom manufacturing tools to punch through that pain point, right? And I think that's a really cool young company, and I'm certain that they will go big or get acquired or do something big. So keep an eye on smart manufacturing. It is also from an industrial policy standpoint for the United States. It is something we absolutely must focus on, and we're seeing more money flowing into it now. So if you're interested in that area, I would encourage you to dive into it.
Thank you.
So there is like one more question in the chat from Aman, who actually had to leave, but I think that's a very interesting question. So giving your unique vantage point, I'm curious to hear what parts of our lives you expect to be transformed over the next few years, particularly those that the rest of us may be underestimating. So yeah.
That is a really, really cool question. And maybe it's a great way for me to talk about the true frontier, right? What I just gave Cameron was sort of what's happening now that may be underhyped. But this question really leads me to talk about what is coming up that is really going to be transformative. And so one is the embodiment of artificial intelligence in robotics. And that sounds trivial, as if we aren't already doing that. But the truth of the matter is a lot of the robots you see out there in all these, glamorous YouTube videos are actually not AI enabled, right? So somebody is sitting and remote controlling, or they're hardwired. When you do that and you pair it with sensors that are distributed all over, let's say, a humanoid robot's body, right? And it doesn't have to be humanoid, it could be any shape. And you enable it to learn from its physical interactions with its physical environment, Okay. Then all of a sudden you've got a very explosive, very promising, very exciting horizon, because now you're evolving the intelligence from a pure AI that's like software based and that's like akin to your wetware up here, your brain, into a very physical intelligence, the way we humans or animals tick, right? And because your intelligence as you're sitting there is not just your brain and your wetware, it's your entire body. Your entire body is an intelligence instrument and processing machine. So your hand is part of your intelligence, and it's an incredibly powerful, intelligent organ, right? And and of course the rest, your skin, the same thing, right? So once you do that to robotics, and it's sort of a whole body processing of the physical environment, you get that transition from AI being purely based on a screen and on the internet to AI being based in our physical environment, right? So that is starting to happen now. As everything else, it'll take 7 to 10 years to mature, right? The next one is understanding brains. And there are some very cool AI-based experiments going on, not just with Elon Musk and in his venture Neuralink, but also with Brian Johnson at Kernel, right, where they're using AI and modern sensor technology invasively or non-invasively to understand how your brain works. Right now we can only model a few thousand neurons firing at each other. What if you could use AI and advanced GPUs or maybe even quantum computing to model how millions of these are firing at each other? We've got 100 billion up there, right? So there's a frontier there that if we break through it, it'll be truly life changing. And when we wrote Solomon's Code, right, our first book, that you see shamelessly advertised behind me, then that you'll see that when we wrote it 6 years ago, experts at DARPA at the Pentagon, right, their long-term R&D unit, were saying it'll take 7 years to be commercially ready, and we're just at the cusp of that happening. So keep an eye on that space. In line with that, studying children's brains and how children learn. Children are really a different species, as it were, from a cognitive perspective, right? Because they learn very differently, they take in much quicker, and then when they hit puberty, they unlearn and unwire all of that to become grown-ups and be like us. And we think of that being a higher evolution of their intelligence, but it may actually not be. It's just a different state, right? And so there is that. And then finally, there is the stringing together of different types of AI, whether it's computer vision or these LLMs, whatever it may be, into compounds and clusters of AI that interact, right? And that together form a more holistic AI, which is not quite the same as artificial general intelligence, but it is sort of a artificial agglomerated intelligence, right? That can now do very different things. And so all of those are really exciting frontiers that will change how our lives work. Whether that happens on a 5, 10, or 15-year horizon, we'll have to see.
Absolutely love the answer, and I'll make sure to send on the recording he asked for that, so I'll make sure to send it. Yeah, Venkat, you had a question? You raised your hand?
Yeah. So there's distinction between facts and perception of facts. I'm curious to know your thoughts on AI's perception as it's a cognitive technology and what it means to the society and what kind of impacts would it have?
Yeah, so we have to realize that whatever AI represents, it may seem like it is sentient, but of course it's not sentient, right? It is simply talking back and meshing what it finds out there, based on the sequencing and logic and causality that it discerns from what we gave it, right? And so it is not sentient, and in future, could it become sentient? Maybe, but I think we're probably 2 decades at least away from that. Now that's still interesting because that still hits you in your career, right? And maybe the part of your career where you're really peaking, and so that will become a factor. in terms of truthfulness, I think we are going to be seeing some very bad fallout, and we haven't really talked on this particular occasion much about all of the catastrophic risks, right? But I do think if we want to harness all that wonderful opportunity that we're talking about, we need to face the risks and realize this, like, move things and move fast and break things is really not appropriate for the cognitive era anymore. And so disinformation, misinformation is a big, big problem, and that plays right to your question about facts and truthfulness. A world in which we accept that somebody's opinion is accepted as fact is a bad world to live in, because you have no more grounding, right? I mean, even just thinking as a business major, how are you going to do due diligence on a person or a company you want to acquire when it's essentially all fungible and made up and so that is actually a beautifully philosophical question, but also one that has some real impact on agency and power out there, whether you're a business decision maker or a politician. So definitely a big one right there, and we'll see that blossoming. I think we're just at the cusp of not just text-based manipulation, but also video-based manipulation. These videos are strikingly lifelike. The human eye can no longer discern that they're not real. And we'll see a lot of attempted manipulation and real manipulation coming up over the next 5 years. And we'll see if we can get away with just flying under that trend with this election. But I think as of this election, we got to pay some real attention to what that does to us. I mean, it could.
Thank you.
I mean, this kind of thing could wreck an election. It could wreck an entire political system. And first and foremost, democracy, because democracy is much more open than any other system, right? For all of its strengths, it has some weaknesses, and that is that it is very attackable because it is so open, right?
So I do want to be mindful of your time. So first of all, thank you so much. Do you want to take like any one last question, or do you have
Sure,
like?
I'm happy to take one more.
So any last question from the audience?
Yeah, I do have one more question, Almog. So, Professor, with any distributed technology, the question always comes around, hey, how it is going to impact the jobs and how it's going to impact the income inequality and all that stuff. But this time with AI and automation, that seems to be even more evident. So what are your thoughts on that? And should governments consider things like, universal basic income to help with this? I'm not talking about right now, but let's assume like 5 years from now or 10 years from now, the trajectory, what do you see happening in those areas, and how should we really think about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. This whole area of future of work, right? So I think the McKinsey numbers on this are the most trustworthy at the moment. And I'm not necessarily a labor or work expert, but from what I've seen, this quote of 60% of all job categories will see 30 to 40% of task displacement. Okay. To me are the most realistic. They're still pretty brushstroke and blanket, but they're much better than these numbers we saw, whatever it was, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, coming out of some very famous people in the UK. I want to say it was Oxford, saying that by 2040 or so, we'll see 50% of all jobs going away, right? I mean, that's clearly not going to happen, and they have since then I think revised, right, those statements, because really fundamentally what we do as humans oftentimes will feel like routine, and you may be bored by it, but it's actually a lot more complex and non-routine than you think. You may just not be interested in it, and it may seem repetitive, but your human skill is still far ahead of that of the average AI that may be competing with you on it. But now these numbers were pre-ChatGPT, pre-Transformers. And so I think we have to take another look at that. But I think what we're finding is one way or another, these tools will elevate us to a level where we can do more of the highly complex things, more of the highly interpersonal things, more of the strategizing, the creating, etc. Which doesn't mean AI can't create. Far from it, it can, but it's a different kind of creativity. And and I think it will free us up to be focused a lot more on humans. That's the irony of the whole thing. We're so focused on the AI, but the AI will focus us on humans, because it should be like a buddy that does all the stuff like take the trash out that you don't want to be doing, right? In a proverbial sense, of course, right? The trash of all the daily office work that you don't want to be doing. And it will become an increasingly sophisticated buddy. But that means you can become increasingly growth focused and skilled at the things that matter most. Now, the key from an economist's perspective, the key question is, and I think you're hinting at it with the question on UBI, are those things that we are then elevating to, are they going to be paid for? Right? Because that's not a given. When we talk about love and empathy and intimacy and ideation and creativity and all that stuff, ask yourself how often you have been through a 360-degree performance review on your job that emphasize those things, right? They measure all kinds of things, but not often, maybe sometimes, but maybe not often, these softer dimensions. We have not yet developed a taxonomy, an appreciation, and a way of valuing all those softer elements that we know add value to an organization's culture and productivity, but we've never developed the means. I mean, how could we, right, to measure them and measure their impact on the bottom line? That is incidentally aided by the fact that I don't know how many of you are CFOs or aspiring CFOs, right? But when you think about how CFOs, what CFOs care about, right? When you buy a computer, when you buy a GPU, you get to capitalize the investment. When you upskill a human, you don't. And so oftentimes, maybe not everywhere, but oftentimes, a CFO will just prefer to capitalize the equipment and to put it on the books. But you can't be. You're going to get valued in an exit event if the company gets acquired or whatever it may be. But the accounting standards are such because they want to avoid too much mushiness and fungibility in the accounting standards, lest you want more Enrons, right? And so they're thoughtfully very conservative, but it's not helping our purpose as humans when we say, oh, but we want to go into this lofty sphere of connectivity and inspiration and humanity, when the CFO says, I don't know how to value that, right? So there's a lot of work to be done by economists and by some of our colleagues, right? David Holtz is doing fantastic work around some of those areas, right? So that's a whole can of worms you opened there that is super exciting too.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I'm absolutely fascinated by the conversation. Thank you so much, Professor, for sharing your wisdom with us. And one of the things I like the most that you said is about lowering the hurdles for to gain knowledge for students. I absolutely love this. So again, thank you so much for sharing the wisdom with us. Really appreciate your time. Thank you all the students for joining us. We'll share the recording on our website, but also I'll share it with you by email. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Wishing you a wonderful weekend.
It was my pleasure. And let me just leave you with one thought, and that is, when you think of yourself with the AI, think of a symbiosis. Don't think about going head to head. Don't think about competing with it. Think about pairing with it as literally like a buddy, learning how it works. It should learn how you work, right? And you play at a much higher level of joint productivity, right, and satisfaction. And when you do that, then you would trying to compete against the machine, because economics are often stacked against you as a human, right? So think symbiosis. All right. And with that, I let you go into your weekend. Have a good one. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I love it. Thank you so much for your time.
All right. Take care, guys.